Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere. You might not survive for more than a day unless you really like to things, cold weather and beer. And no, not the trendy craft beer with a dragon on the label kind of beer brewed by men in wool robes, in a place where the loudest sound is snow sliding off a roof. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment with your city and the exact time you're listening. I like imagining we're in the world. We're all huddled under blankets together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive at the monastery just as the first real snowstorm of winter rolls in. The sky is a sheet of pale gray, the air thick with lazy flakes that seem in no hurry to touch the ground. As you step through the heavy wooden gates, the outside world disappears behind you like a door closing on another life. Here, everything moves slower. Boots scrape softly on the frost-covered stone paths. A single bell tolls from somewhere above, the sound spreading out over the cloister like ripples on water. Your breath hangs in the air, curling upward and vanishing into the cold. It's immediately clear why the monks of their own Pacifics is a place that winter doesn't just visit. It settles in. The snow piles up against walls so high that windows seem to peer out from behind white curtains. The silence is so deep, you can hear the crackle of ice shifting on the roof tiles. A passing monk nods at you, his hood pulled low, his hands tucked into his sleeves. No one seems to be in a rush. After all, where would you go? Beyond these walls lies nothing but fields of snow, frowning rivers, and the kind of one that could strip the skin off your face if you stayed out too long. The air smells faintly of wood smoke and something else. It's warm, bready, almost sweet, and you realize it's drifting from somewhere inside the main building. You follow the scent, boots squeaking softly on the cold stone, until you reach a door worn smooth by centuries of use. Inside, the warmth hits you like a blanket thrown over your shoulders. The stone walls are thick, and the light from beeswax candles makes the room glow like it's been dipped in honey. Somewhere deeper in the monastery, you can hear the gentle, rhythmic thud of something being moved, maybe grain sacks, maybe barrels. It feels strange, knowing you've stepped into a world that measures its time not in days and weeks, but in seasons, and in how many barrels of beer are left before spring. And as you're about to find out, in this place, beer isn't just a drink, it's a survival strategy. The next morning, you wake to the sound of something you didn't expect. Louder. It's muffled, low, and punctuated by the scrape of wood on stone. You pull on your boots and follow the noise, the chill in the corridor making you walk just a little faster. You find the monks in a long, narrow storeroom, lit by narrow slits of daylight. The walls are lined with barrels stacked high, each one marked with a simple chalk tally. The smell here is unmistakable, a rich, yeasty scent with a hint of something earthy, almost grassy. This is the monastery's beer store. Not wine too fussy for this climate, not spirits too harsh for daily drinking. Beer is the heart of this place. It's not just refreshment, it's calories, vitamins, hydration, well, sort of, and morale in liquid form. One monk, with hands that look like they could crush walnuts without trying, is rolling a barrel across the floor. Another is keeping count in a small leather-bound book. You see neat lines of numbers, the ink dark against the pale page. Beside each entry is a short note: Feast of St. Bridget extra ration. Brother Arnulf ill half portion. Cellar temperature holding steady. Here's the thing, in medieval monasteries, beer was more than a drink. It was part of your daily bread. Literally, most monks were entitled to multiple pints a day, and during winter, the ration system became as precise as clockwork, not because they feared running out, but because they feared losing the rhythm of life the beer helped maintain. You notice the chalk marks on the barrels are random. They're a countdown. Each line represents a barrel tapped and another still safe in reserve. The monks seem almost cheerful about the math. You suspect it's because beer isn't just survival's comfort, a tiny rebellion against the cold. One of them, a tall, wiry man with a quick smile, notices your curiosity. The beer tells us how the winter is going, he says in a voice that's half whisper, half confession. Too many barrels gone too early, and we know it will be a lean spring. Too few, and we've been too stingy. You lean in to get a better look at the record book. The handwriting is careful, almost beautiful. Every loop and curve of the letters seems to carry the weight of tradition, and somewhere in there is a cold fact. Beer is as much a calendar here as the carved stone sundial in the courtyard. Historians still debate whether monasteries were the first to perfect the idea of rationing beer in such a formal way. Some argue it was the military. Others think it was fishing crews who spent weeks at sea. Either way, what's clear is that here, in this stone-walled refuge, beer isn't measured in pints, it's measured in survival days. When you leave the storeroom, the cold air of the hallway feels sharper. You can still hear the faint scrape of barrels and the low hum of monks talking, a sound that feels less like work and more like a quiet ritual. And you realize you've just witnessed the monastery's heartbeat counted, recorded, and stored in oak. By midday, you've been gently but firmly pulled into the beer routine yourself. One of the younger monks, Brother Paul, with a face that looks like he's perpetually halfway through a laugh, hands you a small wooden mug and gestures toward a long trestle table. The room is warmer here, thanks to a fire that's been coaxed into steady embers. On the table are loaves of coarse brown bread, a wedge of hard cheese, and, of course, a pitcher of beer the color of weak tea. You take a sip, moldy, a little sour, but surprisingly smooth. It's not the kind of drink that will knock you over. It's the kind you can sip all day and still keep working. This is small beer, Brother Paul explains, sliding onto the bench beside you. Brewed light so we can drink it daily without, he wobbles his head, miming drunkenness in a way that makes the monk across from him snort into his bread. Small beer, you learn, isn't just about keeping sober. It's also about health. In a time when water sources could be iffy at best, beer boiled during brewing was a safer bet. Sure, it tasted different depending on the season, the grains, and who stirred the mash, but it kept bellies full and sickness at bay. The monks track small beer just as carefully as the stronger stuff. In the winter months, every drop counts. The barrels you saw earlier, those aren't just for feast days. They're rationed out to keep spirits from dipping as low as the temperature. One older monk joins in, telling you about a particularly harsh winter decades ago, when the snow piled so high it sealed the cloister gates. We ran short of beer by February, he says gravely, as if recalling a siege. Had to water it down to half strength, worse than I can remember. You can't help but smile at the idea that in a monastery, running out of beer was almost as dire as running out of bread. And maybe, in a way, it was. Bread filled the stomach, but beer warmed the bones and gave people something to talk about that wasn't the weather or the endless chores. You glance around and notice something. Everyone drinks slowly, almost meditatively. There's no guzzling, no hurried swallowing. It's as if the act of drinking itself is a form of prayer. Each sip a small acknowledgement of the work and planning that went into getting it here. Historians are still unsure whether medieval monasteries drank more beer than the surrounding villages, but records suggest they often brewed better quality. Some say it was because they could afford finer ingredients. Others believe it was because monks saw brewing as an extension of their service to God, making the best possible drink for the body while tending to the soul. By the time you finish your mug, you're warmer, calmer, and just a little more convinced that beer might have been one of the reasons monks could endure such long, cold winters without losing their minds. And as you place the empty cup back on the table, you realize you've taken your first step into their honorary rhythm, one sip at a time. By afternoon you've acquired a shadow. Brother Martin, the cellarer, A man who moves like a cat in a library and smells faintly of toasted grain. He gestures for you to follow him back toward the cool belly of the monastery. The corridor narrows. The light slips to a pewter gray, and you start to hear a soft, watery heartbeat. Drip, drip, drip. Condensation, he murmurs without looking back. It keeps the barrels honest. You don't know what that means yet, but it sounds like something you're supposed to nod at wisely. So you do. The barrel room opens like a wooden rib cage. Rows of oak and chestnut curve away on either side, banded in iron, bellies round as moons. Brother Martin picks up a measuring rod, a simple polished stick with shallow cuts along its length, and dips it into the bunghole of a barrel, with the theatrical care of a priest lifting a relic. When he pulls it out, the rod wears a dark wet ring. There, he says, that's tomorrow's math. He shows you the ledger again, this time laying it flat and letting you read as he speaks. Each day is a neat column: the community's head count, the guest house tally, the infirmary extra, the lay brother's portion, the warrant for travelers who might arrive before night. We don't chase fullness, he says, we chase fairness. His finger taps a note written months ago. Storms early. Barley lot test stretch rations by an eighth. The handwriting is the same calm hand you've seen everywhere, as if the ink itself believes in moderation. Why so exact, you ask, though you think you know, because the bell never argues. He replies, and with that he gives you a tour of the monastery's day, not by prayer names, but by mugs. At prime, a swallow to wake the blood. At terce, a ladle for those who have labored since dawn. At sext, the midday measure when shadows are shortest and tempers longest. At none, the quiet cup that keeps the hand steady for the last stretch of work. Vespers brings a warmer draught for the old bones. And after complenium a water, unless the doctor says otherwise. It's a clock you can drink, and you realize your body already knows how to read it. It leads you to a low table where a handful of wooden mugs sit upside down on packs, each with tiny marks burned near the rim. We train the eye, he says, turning one over. Foam tells truth. He fills it halfway from a pitcher and watches. The froth climbs, thickens, settles to a delicate ring that kisses the first burn mark. That, he declares, is a modest ladle. You learn that on heavy workdays, barn repairs, snow shoveling ladles swell like pride. On fast days they shrink, obedient as novices. Here's your main history lesson for the night. Medieval monasteries really did administer food and drink by rule, and the rule of Saint Benedict copied, added it, debated, and slept on for centuries. Counseled moderation in all things. Many communities adapted that to include beer as daily sustenance, especially where water wasn't dependable and wine was a rumor from warmer lands. The cellar was often one of the most trusted officials because it balanced bodies and souls with a jug and a scale. Now for the odd, almost silly detail you won't forget: to test whether a cask had properly conditioned. Brother Martin floats a small, clean slice of yesterday's bread on the surface and watches how long the bubbles lifted. If the sop sings, he says, the beer is ready. The singing is more of a feast than a hymn, but you do hear it, a delicate whisper that promises warmth without wobble. You follow away the image, bread riding foam like a tiny raft on a quiet lake. As you move between casks, he talks about strength and season. Summer beer is lighter, brewed to be gulped without guilt. Winter beer is sturdier, with a spine that stands up to cold mornings and long suns. He opens a small jar of dried herb spot myrtle, a pinch of rosemary, a secret you're told and immediately forget, because the room smells like a warm barn and your brain is melting to kindness. The gruets for winter, he says, keeps the nose cheerful. You ask the taboo question: how much do people actually drink? Brother Martin smiles. Not indulgent, just human, enough to work without complaint. Not so much we sing the wrong verse. Some records from other houses, he admits, mention daily allotments that would scandalize a modern doctor, but strength varied wildly. A pint in one region isn't the same in another, and small beer could be gentle as tea. Historians still argue about the numbers, Was it really 5 or 6 pints? And of what potency? Or is that a misunderstanding born of copying, translation, and the monthly habit of describing cups like poets describe sunsets? The ledger here avoids grand claims. It speaks in ladles, not legends. A bell sounds, somewhere hollow. Patient Brother Martin pauses, then takes you to the refectory, where long tables wait under a quiet cloud of steam. A lay brother pours measured servings into mugs, moving down the line like a metronome. No one talks. The only sounds are spoon, bread, breath. You sit, and the beer arrives. A soft amber ribbon with a fine cap of foam that leaves lace on the rim. You sip, and it's like pinning a little sun to your insides. The reading of the day begins. Passages about winter, diligence, charity. The voice floats over the tables while people eat and drink. Hands synchronized. Minds, too. Partway through, you notice a novice and an old monk exchange mugs for a blink. Then switch back. It's quick, almost invisible, but you catch the white older man's hands tremble during the reading. The novice gives up a fuller measure without ceremony. No whisper, no smile, just the arithmetic of kindness. You wonder how many ounces that is and decide it doesn't matter. After the meal, you follow Brother Martin to the almonry. A small door opens onto the outer court, where two travelers stamp snow from their boots. Guests are part of the calculus as much as brothers' air hospitality is a duty. And in winter, a rescue. Each traveler receives a crust, a bowl of stew, and half a mud that glows like ember held to candlelight. We never give less than half. He says, we want them to sleep. The ledger will get a tidy line tonight to stranger shelf ladles. Back in the cellar, he shows you a diagonal scratch on a barrel hoop. The last week, he says, if the rod hits that mark too early, everyone knows the rhythm must tighten. He doesn't say what that looks like, but you can imagine thinner soup, smaller bread, a foam ring that kisses the second mark instead of the first. The trick, he insists, is to adjust before grumbling begins. Gatherings fail where stomachs speak louder than psalms. A low laugh slips out of you. Do you ever miscount on purpose? He pretends to be shocked. Then shrugs. Mercy is part of math. He taps the ledger with a measuring rod like a baton. But so is tomorrow. Before you go, he hands you a dry mug and sets a stub of charcoal beside it. Memory, he says. Make your own mark. You draw a clumsy little line just below the rim where the foam settled today. It looks like nothing and exactly like everything days measure. The day's mercy, the quiet fact that bodies and spirits are scheduled in sips. One last knowledge crumb for your pocket. Some monasteries brew 2 or 3 grades at small beer for daily thirst, a stronger mass beer for feast days, and a nourishing, sometimes spice winter batch for the infirmary. Whether this place follows that exact scheme is hazy. Brother Martin winks when you ask. Scholars argue over how standardized such practices were across regions, and whether surviving recipes reflect kitchen reality or tidy copyist ideals. You suspect the truth sits somewhere between the foam rings and the ledger lines, where life always does. When you step back into the courtyard, evening has rinsed the snow a deeper blue. Your breath plumes, the bell sighs, and from the kitchen wing comes the soft clatter of bowls laid out for the night. You lift the empty mug once, a mock toast to the sky, and feel the shape of the day settle in your hands, measured, modest, warm where it counts. Morning in the monastery begins before the sun even thinks about rolling out of bed. The air in your cell is cold enough to make your nose reconsider existing. And somewhere in the courtyard, a wooden mallet taps the wake-up board. 3 steady knocks. A pause, then 2 more. You wrap yourself in your cloak and follow the shuffle of feet toward the brewery wing, drawn by a smell that's equal parts fresh bread, warm malt, and something a little sour. Not bad, more like a kitchen that's halfway through making a good stew. Inside, Brother Anselm is already at the mash tun, a giant wooden vat that steams like a hot spring in winter. He looks up with eyes that have been awake since the rest of the world was dreaming, grins, and waves you over. First mash. he says. You watch him ladle warm water over crushed grain, stirring with a paddle taller than you. The grain swirl like a snow globe in slow motion, releasing a sweet, nutty perfume that wraps itself around the damp stone walls. This is where today's ration is born. The beer you've been drinking isn't just pulled from endless barrels. It's constantly in the making, each step timed so the supply chain never snaps. Brother Anselm explains that in winter, brewing is both easier and trickier. Easier because the cold slows spoilage. Trickier because yeast likes to nap when it's chilly. To coax it along, they keep the fermenting room warmer than the rest of the monastery. A snug chamber lined with clay crocks and covered barrels. You peek in, and the air feels almost tropical compared to the icy corridors. There's a practical reason for all this effort. Of course, in medieval Europe, beer wasn't just a drink, it was nutrition in a cup. The grain, yeast, and herbs made it safer than water and more sustaining than a plain broth. Monks, bound by rules of moderation, drank in measured amounts. But those measures had to feed the body's work, chopping wood, tending fields, copying manuscripts. The rule of Saint Benedict didn't say beer outright, but it did allow for a measure of drink daily, and medieval interpretation had a way of leaning toward what was locally abundant. A quirky fact, in some houses, the beer's strength was intentionally lowered in winter, not because they were stingy, but because heavy beer made you sleepy. And sleepy monks didn't chant psalms as crisply. Scholars still argue whether this was a universal policy or just a regional quirk, but you can picture the debates, one side pointing to discipline, the other to but it's freezing outside logic. Brother Anselm lets you taste the wort sweet, pre-fermented liquid that will become beer in a few days. It's warm, silky, and tastes like someone melted a loaf of bread into tea. You're handed a ladle and told to help skim off the foam. This isn't wasted. In some places, it's fed to pigs or used in baking, giving monastery bread that faint, comforting tang you've noticed at breakfast. From there, the process feels almost like a hymn in steps: mash, lauter, boil, cool, ferment. You watch as they add herbs from a linen, bagroot, the medieval blend that could include yarrow, oak myrtle, or rosemary. Hops, though known, weren't always the favorite, yet their bitter edge was still a debated taste. Anselm's recipe has no hops at all, and he proudly insists it's warmer to the spirit. Whether that's true or just brewer's pride, you'll have to decide later. As the brew bubbles gently, he leads you to the storage loft, where sacks of grain are stacked like soft bricks. Each is labeled not just with its weight, but the field it came from and the season it was harvested. Grain is like people, he says. It keeps better with the right company. You run your fingers over the rough weave of a sack and imagine the months between sowing and sipping, plowing in the spring mud, summer sun on ripening heads, autumn harvest under shortening days. And some mentions that some monasteries kept emergency casks in sealed alcoves, only opened in years of famine or siege. The exact number was often a secret, guarded more tightly than the silverware. Historians still bicker over whether these reserves were common, or just a literary flourish in monastic records. But the idea fits: beer wasn't just for comfort, it was insurance. By mid-morning, the brew is cooling, and the rest of the monastery begins its daily rhythm. You watch novices carry buckets of spent grain to the pig pen, where the animals greet them like long-lost friends. Waste isn't really waste here. Everything loops back into the system. Even the ash from the brewery's hearth is saved for soap making. Before you leave, Brother Anselm hands you a small wooden token carved with a mug and a barley stalk. For the ledger, he says, it's how he records batches and progress, each token a placeholder for a beer, not yet ready but already part of the winter's arithmetic. He slips it into a row on a shelf, and you notice the neat gap where tomorrow's token will go. Walking back through the courtyard, you realize that beer here isn't just brewadites braided into the life of the place, a quiet thread running through prayer, work, and rest, and somehow, knowing the steps makes that next mug feel even warmer. You don't head straight to the refectory after leaving the brewery. Instead, you wander toward the cold storage cellars, the kind of place that makes your bones think they're part of the winter landscape. Down a steep stone stairwell, the air shifts down, mineral-rich, and just a little yeasty. It's a smell that says, here, time moves slowly, and everything waits its turn. The cellar is a long, vaulted chamber, its walls lined with casks, not the kind you might imagine from a tavern, but big, squat barrels that look like they've been here since the monks stopped using Latin as their main small talk. Each one is chalk-marked, date of brewing, estimated strength, and a discrete symbol for which part of the ration cycle it belongs to. Some barrels are tagged for festivals, others for daily measure, and a few are marked with nothing at all, probably those legendary emergency reserves Brother Ransom hinted at. You run your hand over one cask. The wood is cold and slightly damp, the iron hoops tight and dark with age. You can feel the quiet pressure inside. Hundreds of gallons of beer resting in the dark, waiting to be ladled into pitchers upstairs. One monk shuffles past, carrying a small lantern that throws gold light across the stone floor. Careful, he says. This one's for Easter. Touch it now, and the abbot will have you sanding pews for a month. There's an art to storage here. The barrels are stacked so that the oldest is always the easiest to reach. Beer might not age like fine wine, but give it a little time, and it's flat. Too much and it's sour. The monks have worked out a rotation system that would make a military quartermaster proud. Some historians think these cellars were the hidden heartbeat of the monastery's survival, keep the rations steady, and you keep timbers even through the long, dark months. You notice the small, shallow bowls on a nearby shelf, tasting cups, not for indulgence, but for checking quality. A bad batch isn't just a waste of work, it's a breach in the winter supply. In some records, there are notes about casks gone bad and the quiet scramble to replace them without drawing too much notice. A monastery without beer could become a monastery with very restless monks. One quirky detail stands out. Hanging from the rafters are bundles of dried herbs meant for cooking, but for pest control. Lavender, tansy, even some stalks of wormwood. The scent is faint but sharp, cutting through the earthy air. It's not just superstition. Historians point out that certain herbs do deter insects and rodents, but whether the monks really understood the science or just followed tradition, no one can agree. A novice appears with a ledger, carefully noting which barrels are due to be tapped next week. You peer over his shoulder, seeing neat columns of dates, batch symbols, and names of the brothers who brewed them. It's less like an inventory and more like a diarrheic batch tied to a time, a season, a set of ends. You find yourself wondering if, centuries from now, someone will be reading these same notes and imagining you standing here. When the novice leaves, you crouch to look closer at the floor. The stone is grooved in long, shallow channels, leading toward a drain at the far end. Overflow, spills, maybe even full cask leaks till find their way down here. You can almost hear the echo of water and beer trickling through those grooves on a busy brewing day. Before you head back upstairs, you catch sight of something unexpected, a small niche in the wall, barely big enough to fit your head into. Inside is a tiny painted panel, faded but still visible. It shows a barley stalk, flanked by two hands in prayer. No one mentions it, but you can tell it's not just decoration. It feels like a quiet blessing on the very thing keeping everyone warm and fed through the cold. Back in the open air, the daylight feels sharper, and your breath fogs in the crisp wind. The smell of baking bread drifts from the kitchen, mingling with the faint memory of malt and herbs from the cellar. You can already picture the day's ration being powdered amber and steady, a small comfort that tastes of patience. The kitchen is alive before you even step through the door, steam curling from the chimney, the rhythmic thump of dough being worked on the big wooden table, and the soft clink of ladles against iron pots. Inside, it's a rush of warmth that fogs your vision for a second. Then you spot the big pot simmering in the corner, and you realize this isn't stew. This is warm beer, Not boiling, never boiling, but heated gently, until it's just shy of too hot to sip. A young monk stirs it slowly with a paddle, the surface steaming in lazy spirals. He sprinkles in something green from a small cloth pouch, and the scent changes to malty, but with a soft, grassy brightness. Mint, he says with a shrug, as if it's no big deal. But in winter, mint is as rare as a good excuse to skip morning prayers. You learn that warming the beer is an old habit here, especially for breakfast. On the coldest mornings, it's served alongside coarse bread and a lump of soft cheese, the kind that smells like it's halfway to becoming butter. Beer at breakfast might sound like an indulgence, but here, it's just calories fuel for a day of work when the sun barely peeks over the horizon. Some historians think this was as much about hydration as it was about nutrition. Water sources could freeze or become murky. Beer was safer, thanks to the brewing process. Others insist it was just the easiest way to make the morning less miserable. The cook, a broad man with a face like a weathered apple, tells you about ration stretching. Sometimes, when the stores run low before the next brewing cycle, they'll water the beer down just enough to keep the mugs full. They still drink it, he says, smirking, but you hear more complaints about the sermons being too long on those days. You watch as mugs are filled from a spouted bucket and carried out to the refectory. The mugs are all different, some plain wood, some with a faint glaze, one or two clearly much older than the rest. You get the feeling that, like cloaks or prayer books, mugs have personal histories here. Maybe they've been passed down through generations of monks, each with its own share of breakfast chatter and winter mornings. In one corner, a small barrel rests on a tilted stand, draped with a cloth to keep it warm. The cook pulls it aside to show you the chalk mark, a single cross. Medicinal batch, he explains. This one's infused with extra herbs, sage, maybe a little honey meant for those feeling the winter's chill in their bones. Whether it truly helps or just tastes like it should, scholars still debate. You're invited to try a cup. The first sip is startling, it like the cold, hearty drink from the brewery, but smooth and mellow, with a whisper of mint and a faint sweetness from the heated malt. It's the kind of warmth that settles not just in your stomach but somewhere behind your ribs. And in that moment, you understand why no one here questions beer for breakfast. Through the open doorway to the refectory, you catch sight of the monks gathering. Their voices are low, the air heavy with the smell of bread, wood smoke, and warm ale. As you watch, you notice something subtle. No one drinks until the abbot takes the first sip. It's a quiet ritual, not written down anywhere, but carried out with a kind of consistency that makes it as solid as law. When the mugs are finally lifted, there's a soft clink of wood on wood, followed by a collective sigh. For a moment, it feels less like a religious house and more like a family kitchen, just a very disciplined one. You slip back toward the door, the warm scent clinging to your clothes, already thinking about how the rest of the day's rations are handled. The storeroom smells like every season, layered on top of each other, dried herbs hanging from the rafters, sacks of barley stacked neatly in rows, and a faint tang of hops that clings to wood no matter how many times it's scrubbed. You step inside and feel the temperature drop. The thick stone walls hold the cold like a stubborn memory. A monk in a brown robe, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, is bent over a ledger. The table in front of him is covered in small piles, barley, rye, hops, even a few knobby roots you don't immediately recognize. He notices you and nods toward the ledger. Inventory day, he says, his tone half weary, half proud. You edge closer and see neat columns of numbers, each one representing the monastery's beer supply in various stages: grain and storage, grain and mash, beer in casks, beer already promised for feasts or visiting dignitaries. Every number matters. If they miscalculate, there's no quick run to the market. The nearest village is days away, and in winter, even that can be impossible. It's here you learn about the silent week. Once or twice a winter, the beer ration is reduced to almost nothing, not for punishment, but for reflection, or at least That's the official reason, the monk confides, lowering his voice, that it's really about buying time until the next batch is ready. Reflection is easier when your mug is lighter. He jokes. On a side shelf sits a row of sealed jugs, marked with wax stamps. These are the high-strength reserve ales, brewed with extra malt and stored for months. They're not for daily drinking. These are for Easter, big feast days, or emergencies when morale needs saving. Some historians think this kind of reserve brewing was a way to manage both resources and behavior. Others believe it was simply a practical insurance policy against bad harvests or brewing accidents. You notice a smaller shelf in the corner, crammed with tiny cloth bags. The monk explains these are flavorings, dried herbs, fruit peels, and even the occasional pinch of exotic spice. They're rare, and using them in everyday beer is frowned upon. But when the abbot's in a good mood, they might make a special batch just to break the monotony. From a hook near the door, he takes down a flat wooden paddle etched with deep notches. It's a measuring stick, each notch the exact depth for a day's worth of grain for brewing. Too much, and you shorten the season. He says, too little, and you get weak beer that makes everyone grumpy. It's a balance that's been fine-tuned over generations, passed down like a family recipe. As you look around, you realize the storeroom isn't just a place for keeping supplies. It's the monastery's nervous system. Every sack, jug, and scrap of parchment here is a decision about who drinks what, when, and how much. And in a place where the days are short and the nights are long, those decisions shape the rhythm of the entire winter. When you step back outside, blinking in the pale light, you can still feel the storeroom's cool air clinging to your skin. Somewhere, a bell rings for midday prayers, and you wonder how many mugs of beer will be filled afterward exactly as planned, down to the last drop. By now, you've learned that monastery life runs on two invisible currents, prayer and beer. And if you follow the sound of wooden mugs clinking, you find yourself in the refectory just as the midday meal is being served. The room is long and narrow, lit by high, narrow windows that let in strips of pale light. The walls are bare, except for a single tapestry depicting a saint holding a foaming mug. You take a seat at one of the long benches, and a young monk slides a wooden mug in front of you. The beer is deep amber, cloudy, with a faint scent of malt and earth. The abbot gives a short blessing, and then it begins. Everyone drinks at once. No toasts, no small talk, just the quiet satisfaction of men who've earned their midday ration. You take a sip, and feel the warmth spread instantly through your chest, chasing away the chill that's been sitting in your bones all morning. One of the brothers across from you explains the meal's rhythm. Beer isn't just a drink, he writes, a part of the diet. It provides calories, hydration, and, let's be honest, a mild sense of happiness that helps make the long winter bearable. Monks often call it liquid bread, and after a few sips, you understand why. The beer you're drinking is what they call small beer, lower in alcohol, meant for daily consumption. The stronger stuff is locked away, saved for feast days and honored guests. Historians still debate whether the average medieval monk was tipsy most of the time. The record suggests the alcohol content varied wildly depending on the season, the recipe, and, frankly, how generous the brewer was feeling that week. Your seatmate leans in, telling you about an old rule. Each monk gets a set number of mugs per day, measured out in careful increments. But mug is a flexible term. Larger vessels appeared mysteriously when the brewer was feeling generous, and smaller ones showed up when supplies were tight. Everyone pretends not to notice, because officially, the rules never change. The meal itself is simple: thick slices of bread, a wedge of hard cheese, and a stew made from root vegetables that taste faintly of the earth they grew in. The beer washes it down easily, and you can see why no one here wastes water on drinking it. Safer, tastier, and somehow feels like part of the prayer itself. Halfway through the meal, a young novice rushes in carrying a tray of fresh mugs. These, you learn, are for the second measure, a tradition on particularly cold days. The abbot gives the smallest nod, and suddenly everyone's spirits lift. The second round is served, and the room hums just a little louder. When the meal ends, the mugs are stacked neatly, the benches pushed back, and the monks file out in the same quiet order they arrived. You follow them into the cloister, feeling both full and oddly light, as though the combination of beer and prayer has taken the edge off the cold. It occurs to you that in a place like this, beer isn't just a beverage, it's a thread woven through every part of daily life, from the storeroom's meticulous ledgers to the shared warmth of the refectory, and the thread is what keeps the whole tapestry from unraveling when the winter wind howls outside. After lunch, the monastery settles into a gentle hum of activity. You trail after a group of monks heading toward the brewery, a low stone building tucked behind the main hall, where the air is warmer and sweeter than anywhere else in the complex. Inside, it's a world of barrels and steam. Copper kettles bubble quietly, releasing a malty aroma that wraps around you like a heavy blanket. A brewer in a stained apron stirs a thick, frothy liquid with a wooden paddle taller than you are. He doesn't look up as he greets you with a friendly, "Mind your step floor's slippery" when the word's running. He explains that winter brewing is a balancing act. The cold slows fermentation, but the cold also keeps the beer from spoiling. "It's nature's cellar," he says, pointing to a row of barrels stacked against the wall. Each one is labeled with chalk dates, batches, and cryptic notes like Light or Abbott's Reserve. You watch as another monk pours a bucket of water into a kettle, followed by a carefully measured scoop of dry hops. The hops give the beer its bitterness and help it keep longer thaw. In earlier centuries, before hops became common, brewers here used all sorts of herbs like yarrow, oak myrtle, and even rosemary. Historians are still divided on when exactly hops took over as the preferred preservative. Some say it was as late as the 15th century in this region. Your guide invites you to try stirring the mash. It's heavier than you expect, like moving a pot of porridge that doesn't want to cooperate. The brewer chuckles and tells you they stir for hours to keep the temperature even. "If you stop too long, the grain settles," he says. And then you've got a problem. A young novice wheels in a small cart loaded with sacks of grain barley, mostly, though they sometimes mix in wheat or oats depending on what's available. The sacks are labeled not just by type, but by which field they came from. Certain plots, the brewer insists, make a sweeter beer. "It's all in the soil," he says, with the authority of someone who's been tasting for decades. In one corner, a monk is bent over a ledger, recording every batch, who brewed it, how much grain was used, and most importantly how many mugs it will yield. This isn't just bookkeeping. It's the invisible backbone of the monastery's ration system. Every mug that appears at the refectory table has already been accounted for, sometimes months in advance. You ask whether any of these barrels will be sold. The brewer smiles but shakes his head. "Not in winter. What we make now is for use and maybe for the pilgrims who get stuck here in a snowstorm. Selling beer in winter," he explains, "would be like selling your firewood when the first snow falls, foolish and short-sighted." As you step back into the crisp afternoon air, your clothes still carry the scent of malt and wood smoke. The brewery door closes behind you, sealing away the warmth, the bubbling kettles, and the quiet satisfaction of a craft honed over centuries. And you realize that, here, beer isn't just made, it's guarded, counted, and preserved like a treasure. Not because it's rare, but because in the deep cold of winter, it's part of what keeps life from feeling too sharp at the edges. Later that day, you find yourself in the monastery's storage cellar, a low, vaulted chamber dug partly into the earth. The air is cool and slightly damp, smelling of stone, stirrup, and the faint tang of fermenting grain. A row of candles flickers along the wall, their light catching on the rounded sides of barrels stacked like sleeping giants. A monk named Brother Odo is in charge here. He has the look of someone who knows exactly how much beer is in each cask without ever needing to open them. In fact, he keeps a tall staff marked with notches, which he uses to measure the beer level through a small opening at the top. He dips, checks, and notes the amount in a ledger before sealing it again with a wooden stopper. Every drop has a destination, Odo explains in a tone that's not stern, but certain. In winter, the monastery cannot afford surprises like running out of beer in February, when there's still a month of snow ahead. Each cask is tied to a ration schedule, daily mugs for the brothers, extra for feast days, and a small reserve for travelers who might arrive seeking shelter. You learn that beer in monasteries wasn't always about indulgence. In the Middle Ages, water wasn't always safe to drink, especially in winter when stagnant ice could hide all sorts of unpleasantness. Brewing made the liquid safer, and beer offered calories at a time when fresh food was scarce. That's why even monks, known for fasting and discipline, considered beer a necessity rather than a luxury. Odo shows you the marking system, chalk symbols on the sides of barrels indicating their strength and age. Some have a single, cross-light, everyday beer. Others have 2 or even 3 crosses, strong or brews reserved for celebrations or medicinal use. Too strong for daily drinking, Odo says, unless you want the abbot to find you napping at vespers. In one shadowy corner, you notice a small stack of barrels bound with iron hoops. Their lids are sealed with wax. Odo hesitates before explaining. These are special reserves, brewed with extra spices or stronger grain ratios, meant for rare occasions of visiting bishop, a major saint's day, or perhaps to cheer the brothers after a particularly brutal winter storm. You ask if anyone ever sneaks a sip. Odo smiles in a way that suggests the answer is both yes and no. Officially, no one would dare. Unofficially, well, history is full of thirsty humans. Historians, in fact, still debate just how strictly monasteries enforce their own ration rules. Some records suggest remarkable discipline, while others hint at a cheerful flexibility. Before you leave, Odo hands you a small wooden mug and dips it into one of the lighter barrels. The beer is cool, mildly sweet, and slightly cloudy, with a soft, grainy aftertaste. It's not the crisp lager you might expect. Centuries lie terrace closer to liquid bread, hearty and sustaining. Climbing back up into the winter daylight, you realize the cellar is less a storage space and more a heartbeat. Without it, the rhythm of the monastery meals, work, the quiet moments by the fire would feel thinner. And maybe that's why every barrel here is treated like part of the family. Snow starts falling again by evening, soft and persistent, as if the sky has decided to wrap the monastery in another blanket. You find yourself in the scriptorium, a long, narrow room warmed by a single fireplace at one end. This is where the monks spend daylight hours copying manuscripts, illuminating pages, and occasionally pausing to stretch their hands. But tonight, the room has a different purpose. A group of brothers are gathered around a table in the corner, not with ink and quills, but with a set of small wooden tokens and a parchment covered in tidy rows. It's the beer ration register. Every monk has a symbol assigned to him across a fish, a simple swirl, and each symbol appears beside a tally of mugs received for the week. Brother Alaric, a wiry man with a quick grin, explains how it works. Each day, a monk receives his mug from the kitchen. If he's sick, working outside the monastery, or otherwise absent, the mug is marked held and the portion is saved. After a few days, the held portions might be combined into a larger serving for feast days. The system is designed to be fair, but also flexible. You learned that beer wasn't the only thing mashing this way. Cheese, dry fish, even honey had similar tallies. The trick was keeping everyone honest, without turning the monastery into a bureaucracy. It's not about suspicion, Alaric says. It's about memory. In winter, days blend together. A mark compartment remembers for you. One curious thing catches your attention. Some names have a tiny star next to them. Alaric leans closer and whispers, "Those are the brothers who brew." Brewing duty came with certain privileges, mostly the right to taste us more often than anyone else. Officially, the tastings are for quality control. Unofficially, well, Quality control can take as many sips as needed. Historical records, you recall, often paint monasteries as strict, sober places, but there's growing debate among scholars about just how much beer made its way into daily life. Was every sip of beer a solemn act of necessity, or did it carry moments of quiet joy? The truth, like the brewing process, was probably a careful mix of both. As the monks wrap up their tallying, one of them produces a small basket of dried herb syrup, juniper berries, and something that smells faintly like rosemary. You ask, and they tell you it's for the next brew batch, meant to ward off winter illnesses. In a time before hops became standard, herbs like these gave beer not just flavor, but a hint of medicinal hope. Before the group disperses, they make one final mark on the parchment, the expected empty date for each barrel. It's almost like writing a little prophecy beginning. This one will be dry by Lent, another will be tapped. Walking back through the cloister, you think about how something as simple as beer rations could weave itself into the rhythm of daily life here. It's more than a drink, it's a clock, a ledger, a shared comfort against the cold. And in the hush of the snowy night, you realize you've started to keep track in your own head too, counting quietly along with them. Morning comes late in winter, and by the time you step into the courtyard, the sun is already sitting low in the sky, painting everything in a pale gold. Today, Brother Matthias, the unofficial keeper of beer logistics, has agreed to show you the storage cellar. He warns you to dress warmly. You take the advice seriously, and still, the chill that hits you down there feels like stepping into a stone refrigerator that forgot what summer was. The cellar is a long vaulted space beneath the refectory, its walls slick with cold moisture. Rows of wooden barrels sit on raised platforms, each with a painted mark to indicate its contents and age. Some marks are simple, just the year, but others are symbols. A fish for fasting beer, a sunburst for feast day brew, a small flower for a lighter, herbal batch. Matthias walks you along the line like a curator in a beer museum. He explains that fasting beer, called small beer, has lower alcohol and fewer ingredients, making it acceptable during certain periods when indulgence is frowned upon. Feast day brews, however, are richer, darker, and stronger, often sweetened with honey or flavored with imported spices if the monastery can afford them. You notice how carefully the barrels are stacked, only touching the damp floor, each one rotated at set intervals so the wood swells evenly and the beer matures without spoiling. The method is so precise, it feels almost ceremonial. In fact, Matthias admits, some monasteries in history treated beer making as a sacred duty, whether it was because of genuine devotion or because good beer kept the community happy. Scholars still argue about. A faint smell of malt and oak lingers in the air. It's comforting, almost like warm bread, and you catch yourself breathing deeper just to hold onto it. But Matthias isn't done with his tour. At the far end of the cellar, he stops at a small locked door and produces a key from around his neck. Inside is a much smaller room for reserve. Here, the barrels are smaller, the wood polished, and the marks more elaborate. These are the monastery's finest brews, reserved for visiting dignitaries, special religious occasions. Or Matthias says with a slight grin when the abbot is in a very good mood. Some of these barrels are flavored with things you wouldn't expect: crushed juniper berries, dried cherries, even a pinch of saffron for one particularly extravagant batch. You can almost see the story in your mind. A snowstorm outside. The monks gathered in the refectory, someone tapping a barrel from the reserve, and the whole room filling with a deep, rich scent that makes the cold vanish for a while. Before you leave, Matthias hands you a small wooden cup and tips it under one of the simpler barrels. The beer is cool, earthy, and faintly bitter, but the taste lingers, warming you from the inside out. As you climb back into the daylight, you think about how the cellar isn't just a storage room, it's a time capsule of every harvest, every careful brewing season, every shared winter evening in the monastery. Later that day, You find yourself back in the kitchen, drawn in by the scent of roasting grain. A few monks are standing around a long wooden table, their sleeves rolled up, working in quiet concentration. This is the other half of the monastery's beer-making story, preparation for the next brewing season. Brother Anselm, who seems to have the patience of a saint and the eyebrows of an owl, beckons you over. He points to a wide, shallow tray filled with barley. The grains are damp, and he explains they've been soaked for 2 days to start the germination process. The grain thinks it's spring, he says with a chuckle, and that's when it releases the magic we need for beer. You watch as they spread the soaked grain across the table, turning it gently with wooden paddles to keep the moisture even. It's warm to the touch, thanks to the living process inside each seed. Once the sprouts appear, the monks will halt the germination by drying the grain sometimes over a wood fire, which adds a subtle smoky note to the final beer. Anselm hands you a few roasted grains from a nearby sack. They're dark, almost chocolatey in color, and when you bite one, there's a burst of sweetness followed by a toasty bitterness. That, he says, is the flavor that keeps a winter evening alive. In the corner, you notice a small jar of crushed herb siero, sweet ale, and a little rosemary. These aren't for cooking, they're for gruet, the herbal mixture that flavored beer before hops became common in Europe. Some monasteries resisted hops for centuries, preferring the more complex flavors of their traditional blends. Whether it was stubborn tradition or genuine taste preference, historians still debate. You help for a while, turning the grain, brushing stray husks off the table. It's strangely meditative, the rhythmic motion and the warm scent filling the air. The monks speak little, but when they do, it's about the weather, the grain harvest, or the taste of last year's brew. There's no rush, hurryingly the slow, careful work that winter allows. Before you leave, Anselm shows you a row of cloth sacks hanging high from the rafters. These are the dried, roasted grains, ready to be ground into malt. Each sack is labeled with a date and type, like a careful archive of future flavors. He pats one gently, as if it were a sleeping animal. These will keep us company when the snow makes the world quiet, he says. As you step out into the courtyard, the late afternoon light is already fading. The smell of roasted barley clings to your clothes, warm against the cold air. You realize that here, beer isn't just a drink, it's a thread that ties together the seasons, the work, and the people. And right now, you're holding that thread in your hands. The final week of winter, the monastery feels like a clock ticking towards spring. The snow outside is still knee-deep, but there's a different rhythm to the place now, a quiet hum of preparation rather than survival. You've learned the beer ration schedule by heart, and the sound of the cast taps opening each evening has become almost as comforting as the ringing of the prayer bell. Tonight, the refectory is especially lively. Word has it that the brothers are opening one of the older barrels, brewed more than 2 years ago and kept back for special occasions. Nobody tells you exactly what the occasion is. It could be the feast of a saint, the anniversary of the abbot's ordination, or maybe they just decided the barrel deserved to be enjoyed before it turned into vinegar. The cask is rolled in from the cellar, its wood darkened by age, the iron hoops creaking slightly. Brother Thomas taps it with a small wooden mallet, and the first pour is a deep amber, almost glowing in the candlelight. The smell is richer than anything you've encountered all winter. Sweet malt, a hint of smoke, and a touch of something herbal from the old gruet recipe they used back then. You take a sip, and the flavor is layered, smooth and warming, with a faint tang that makes you think of autumn leaves. Around you, the monks are smiling more than usual, their laughter filling the long hall. Even the stern Brother Gerard, who usually drinks in silence, raises his mug in a toast. As the night deepens, the conversation turns to memories, the hardest winters, the best harvests, the times the beer didn't turn out right, and they had to trade cheese to a neighboring abbey for a few casks. You realize that beer here isn't just a drink, it's a living record of the seasons, each batch marked by the weather, the grain, and the hands that made it. One of the older monks, his voice like worn leather, tells you that in some monasteries, beer rations were so essential, they were listed alongside bread in official records. Take away our bread, he says, and we grow weak. Take away our beer, and we grow grumpy. Historians still argue whether this was just a figure of speech or a serious admission of dependency. But the way the room laughs, you suspect there's truth in both. When the mugs are finally emptied, the monks begin stacking the benches and dousing the candles. Outside, the wind is calmer than it's been in weeks, and the moon spills silver light across the courtyard. You stand there for a moment, feeling the warmth of the beer in your chest against the chill of the night. In the distance, you hear the faint creak of the grain storehouse and the drip of melting snow from the roof. Spring isn't here yet, but you can smell it faint and green, like a promise. And for the first time all winter, you think you might miss the deep, slow days of counting beer rations. The fire in the refectory has faded to a warm glow, just enough to cast lazy shadows along the walls. Outside, the last flakes of snow drift down, soft as dust, settling on the silent cloisters. You breathe in slowly, catching the lingering scent of malt and wood smoke in the air. A scent you know you'll carry in your memory long after you've left this place. The monks have all gone to their cells now, their steps quiet, their robes whispering along the stone floor. Somewhere far off, a single bell tolls, not to summon or command, but simply to mark the passing of another night. The sound is low, steady, and somehow safe. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine the snow melting, the first shoots of green pushing up through the thawing earth. But for now, the world is still wrapped in its winter blanket, and you're wrapped in your own full belly, warm drink, and the comfort of knowing you belong, if only for a little while, to the quiet rhythm of this monastery. Let the hum of the wind be your lullaby, the heartbeat of the place carrying you toward dreams. You've counted the days, the mugs, the barrels, and now you can stop counting. Just rest. Good night, traveler. Sleep well.